Greetings, Bakotunes podcast listeners. It's your host, Mattomunoz, back with another mind-bending episode of the Bakotunes podcast, brought to you by Bakotopia.com. On this episode 62, we welcome a true legend of Latin alternative rock music, the one and only Ceci Bastida. A familiar voice and face to fans of early Latin rock or rock en español, if you prefer, as keyboardist and vocalist to Tijuana, Mexico ska punk music legends Tijuana NO, Bastida is ready to show off her new solo prowess to the world. Indiscriminate music fans should already know Bastida's place in the genre's history, singing lead on two of Tijuana NO signature tunes Pobre de Ti and a cover of the Clash's Spanish Bomb. She also traveled the globe touring with critically acclaimed artist and friend Julieta Venegas, who's also been featured on the Bakotunes podcast. Now solo, Bastida is preparing to make her own waves in 2010 with a new full-length release coming in March. Bakotopia spent some time with Bastida via telephone from her LA residence on December 10, 2009, just a few hours before her final show of '09 at East LA's Eastside Love Club to talk history, her future, and capricious American music fans. So pop open a cold brew and find out just how cool Ceci Bastida really is off stage. Starting with my first question about being considered the first lady of rock en español.
I don't know. I've never thought of myself as that, honestly. And I'm not trying to be like all humble or anything. You know, I started when I was very young, and I think I wasn't aware of a lot of things. I was kind of just playing because I wanted to, and I was kind of unaware of, like, you know, promoters or, you know, the business aspect of the whole thing. So, or the, you know, publicity and stuff like that. So, you know, to me, I was just playing, and I was excited that we had a record out, and, you know, the people came to the show. So that was pretty cool for me. So I mean, now that I see things, and I listen to some of the Tijuana NO stuff, I'm like, wow, that was in 1991, or that was where it seems like so long ago.
Yeah, it does seem like a long time ago, but yet a lot of that music is so timeless, especially because there's people who are still barely discovering that whole scene.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing. I feel like after so many years, even though I don't do any of the ska stuff anymore, and I wouldn't want to do it right now anymore, but I see that there's still bands, you know, doing it and still excited about it, and there's a lot of audience for that still, so that's pretty cool.
And that leads into my question about people just discovering the scene. It's a little easier to get info now, but what was the alternative music scene in Tijuana like during the 80s and the 90s?
When I started playing, there were a few bands that to me seemed like they were doing very interesting and new stuff, and I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that we were so close to San Diego, and you had so much access to all of these other bands from not only from the U.S. but like from the U.K. and, you know, all over the place. So it was such a common thing to just kind of go and watch good, interesting bands, and I think that really helped the musicians in TJ kind of come up with different sounds and experiment a little bit more. And since we're so far away from Mexico City, it just kind of there was not a lot of communication between the bands in Mexico City and the bands in TJ. So we kind of related more, you know, to people in bands in San Diego or, you know, or TJ in Mexicali and, like, you know, the cities close to TJ. So it was very interesting. You know, some bands were doing stuff like Dead Can Dance, and then there were other people experimenting more like with funk, and still like some bands doing heavy metal. There were people doing all kinds of stuff. It just seemed like a really nice, tight community of musicians kind of supporting each other. So that was very cool.
Was it easy to put on shows back then, or were there even promoters helping that segment of the scene?
No, the interesting thing about Tijuana is that even though it has so many influences by, like I said, musicians have so many influences by different bands and everything, it still kind of feels like a small town. At least it did when I was living there. So we pretty much knew everybody. We knew the owners of venues, and we knew the people that ran the radio station. So it was fairly easy for us to kind of just get in touch with the owner of a certain venue and say we want to do the show. They'll say, okay, I'll give you this percentage, and then we'd be in charge of getting like security and police and, you know, the ambulance for whatever happened. Sometimes even being in charge of like getting the alcohol or beers or whatever. You know, we were in charge of a lot of things.
Now, who were your musical influences growing up?
Growing up, I think it was the Clash was one of the bigger ones, and I think they when I think about them, still they just seem like the perfect band in a way, where they were talking about all of these things that we were talking about, you know, political issues and social issues. But musically, the songs by themselves kind of work very well. They're almost kind of pop in a way, but they have these great mixes of different rhythms and beats and and genres, and I think that they were exploring and experimenting a lot.
Now, many fans were introduced to you performing alongside Julieta Venegas. How did your friendship become a working relationship after Tijuana NO? Because I know she performed at Tijuana NO for a while,
Well, Julieta, she was playing with a band when she was when she was in high school. I just started high school, and she was in the last year of high school. And she was playing in a band, so I started going to see the band, and we just became really good friends. And then I started with Tijuana NO, and after like a year or so, her band broke up. And so, because she was friends with the guys in Tijuana NO, we said, oh, why don't you come and play with us? So she played for a little while with us. And then she went to Mexico City after a while. And, one day I was in TJ, and she called me and said, I'm going to go play in LA, and my keyboard player doesn't have a visa. Could you do it? And I was like, all right. So I learned the songs. I came here and played with her. And then we just had so much fun. And she was like, oh, do you want to stay? And I was like, sure. So we started playing like that, and but she wasn't playing that. She wasn't that popular, so there were shows, but there weren't that many shows. But after a while, when she recorded the third one and she started getting famous, that's when I decided to move to Mexico City because everybody was based down there. So I moved there to play with her, and I ended up playing with her till 2008. I think. Yeah.
So you really experienced that rise into the Latin world and even into the crossover world, a lot with her. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
When did you decide it was time to leave and go out on your own?
I think probably a little bit over a year before I left her band. With Julieta, it was a lot of fun, but it was also her music, so there was really not much of a creative part that I had. I just kind of played whatever was recorded and kind of added a few things or arranged it a little bit differently. With Tijuana NO, I was very involved in the writing of the songs, and I just felt like all of a sudden I was this musician that was just playing someone else's music. And as much as that was fun for me, I kind of was wanting to go back to writing. So I just started writing a little bit while I was still playing with her, and all of a sudden I kind of started feeling better about myself. And some people that I would show the music to were kind of like, oh, that's kind of cool. I think it changed when I released an EP. I think it was in 2007.
Is it the one that's on iTunes?
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah. I got invited to do Morning Becomes Eclectic and just stuff like that, and I was like, oh, all right. I was questioning whether I should continue with her. And the thing is that with her, it was also a very good job, because it was something that was fun, but I also got paid for it, fairly well. So the idea of leaving that and starting my own thing and not knowing what's going to happen was kind of scary at first, but I think I did the right thing.
What do you have on the horizon? I know you're doing some recording because I've seen little videos of you in the studio or little bits and pieces of you playing live here and there and trying to kind of put the pieces of the puzzle together as to what's going on.
I started working on the record in the beginning of this year, 2009. I thought I had the whole record ready, like around May, I think it was, and I kept saying, oh yeah, the record's going to be out in the summer of 2009. And it never happened, and I think I realized that I was kind of rushing to put it out, and when I stopped and kind of looked at it, I realized that I wasn't 100% happy with it. So I decided to go back and redo most of it. I'm so happy that I did it because now I'm confident that this is what I want to put out. But in that process, it didn't make sense to put it out by the end of 2009 because the timing wasn't right. So we decided we're putting it out in March of 2010. In the meantime, I'm still working on details. Some of the songs need to be mixed again. It needs to be mastered again. So there's a lot of things that need to be done, but it's definitely coming out in 2010, hopefully in March. So that's what I've been working on.
We'll be back with more Ceci Bastida in just a few minutes, but right now let's check out a track off of Ceci's 2007 EP, Front BC, available online at iTunes and at Amazon.com MP3. This is Vas Pa' Atrás here on Bakotunes Podcast, brought to you by Bakotopia.com.
No te lo voy a contar a ti, ya no regresa a tu lugar. No te lo voy a contar a ti, si no lo puedes aceptar. No te lo voy a contar a ti, no tiene caso ni avanzar. No te lo voy a contar a ti, si quieres realmente escuchar. Y vas y andas hacia atrás, te niegas siempre a recordar. Te vas creyendo que es mejor y no decides olvidar. No te lo voy a contar a ti, no creo que a decir, no te lo voy a contar a ti, que no lo pienso repetir. Y si te gusta la verdad, no te vayas a quedar, él nunca te llevará, no es de frente y van atrás. Y si te gusta te observar, el humo no dejará. Y si te quieren apartar, que si van y van atrás. Y si te gusta mi verdad, si es que das un paso atrás, ya no te vayas a quedar, ya no vuelvas nunca más. Y si te gusta mi verdad, y si vas para atrás, ya no te vayas a quedar, que no digan que vas y vas atrás. Si vas, que si van y van atrás. Si vas, que si van y van atrás. Que si vas,
Al Capone guns don't.
Latin alternative music, it had a swell of potential crossover popularity in the mid-90s. I remember like when Matador came out by the Cadillacs, I mean, it was everywhere, and it was like this Latin music boom was coming, and you had Ricky Martin over here doing the pop stuff, but you had the rock en español, and then it started kind of rolling off everybody's lips, and some of the bands for that were around for a long time, like Maldita, you know, you started seeing them a little bit more, and it was almost like they were ready to cross over, but then it just peaked, and it went back to being this kind of niche sound for like cool college kids. And what do you see the sound in that whole genre heading in terms of its place in popular music?
I don't know exactly what's going on. I can tell you now, my experience now living in this country is very different than when I was living in Mexico. And right now, for example, even putting out my album, there are labels, you know, indie labels that have heard it, and they're like, oh, you know, I like it a lot. I just don't know what to do with someone who sings in Spanish. So I think the language is still an issue here, even though, you know, there's so many Latinos here. A lot of these people don't see that there's this whole gigantic world of people who could be into the music that a lot of bands are doing.
And they don't even necessarily have to speak Spanish
No.
or be proficient in it. The music's good. I mean, it really does reach out to you.
That's also what I say. It's like when we were growing up, I didn't speak English till later on in life. And to me, you know, I listened to stuff in English all of my life, and I knew a lot of people who didn't speak any English, and, you know, they listened to everything, and it wasn't an issue. You know, you would kind of like try to sing along and invent words or whatever, but for some reason it's different here. Well, not everybody, but a lot of people need for it to be in English, otherwise they'll dismiss it. And I also think there's something about Spanish that is not particularly attractive to a lot of people. I think that if I was singing in French, for example, people would say, oh, how chic. But Spanish, I think it reminds people, oh, you know, all those people that live here, or, you know, oh, my gardener speaks Spanish. And I've heard that a lot, like, oh, maybe I think my gardener might know your music. You know, those kind of comments, which don't necessarily mean to be negative, but that's how people see it.
That's the kind of the cool thing about going to Coachella and seeing like when Julieta played there. But like this past year when I went, I saw Gran Silencio, I saw Mexican Institute of Sound, I saw Molotov, and I mean the response was overwhelming. And it wasn't just a bunch of Mexicans there watching it; it was everybody. And,
exactly.
And a lot of the Anglos and a lot of the people, the international crowd that were there, they'd been waiting years to see these bands.
And I think people don't give people here credit either, because, yeah, there is this big population that might think like, oh, what am I going to listen to Spanish for? But, you know, I went to Coachella also and saw Café Tacuba once, and, you know, it was packed, and there wasn't just all Mexicans. There were a bunch of Mexicans, but not everybody.
Yeah.
And, you know, a lot of people are intrigued by it and know that there's good stuff happening and, you know, just don't have as much access to it,
Absolutely.
You know, to see the bands because people don't come here as often. I mean, they do, but it's not the same.
The last question, if you weren't playing music and pursuing this career, what would you be doing?
Let me think. I think at one point I wanted to be a therapist.
Really? Like a shrink?
Yeah, not necessarily a psychiatrist, more like a psychologist. I also study history. and I was teaching a little bit, some kids in like high school and junior high, and even though I loved it, it was kind of a pain in the ass.
Yeah. I think you could have been Dr. Bastida.
That could have been fun.
Yeah,
I probably wouldn't be struggling as much as I'm doing now.
Well, I'm glad that you're playing music because you have the track record to prove that you've got the skills, and I really appreciate you taking the time to interview. I've been wanting to interview you for a while.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks again to Ceci Bastida for hanging out with Bakotunes. You can find her online at www.cecibastida.com. Make sure you spell it right, CECIBASTIDA.com. And of course at MySpace, Facebook, and Twitter, just look her up. Find more Bakotunes episodes at our blog, www.bakotopia.com/blogs/Bakotunes. And don't forget to pick up issue 70 of Bakotopia magazine featuring Ceci and more. Find a free rack or read it online at our website, www.bakotopia.com. This is Matt Munoz. Peace.
Bakotunes